go live.
Understood.
And so we're going to continue our conversation on S115, which we had some testimony on earlier this morning and yesterday. And today we've got James Sherrard, who is the Stormwater Program Manager. Is that correct?
Yes.
For the Burlington Public Works Department. And I understand you have some testimony to share, not anything in writing or anything we should be looking at on our screen, but if you do have something you want us to look at, send it along. Afterwards is fine.
Yes, I prepared something to provide verbally, but if desired, we can send along the written comments following this testimony.
Great. Well, if you want to get started, then we're all here, and we'll let you say whatever you'd like to say, and then if you have time for questions, we'll save our questions, or we can jump in the middle if it seems like that might be more helpful.
That sounds great. Thank you. Well, representatives of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to provide testimony regarding S115. Following yesterday's committee meeting in which the farm manager of the Intervale Community Farm provided testimony, the committee discussed Burlington-specific stormwater billing practices, which also spurred general discussion of MS4 communities and stormwater utilities. My testimony today is intended to provide a brief overview of the Burlington Stormwater Program, which may address some of those questions, discuss problematic language in S115, which deserves additional consideration, and recommend to the committee that they adopt the language proposed by the Senate Committee on Finance. So the city of Burlington established a dedicated stormwater program in 2009 in an effort to address both state and federal stormwater permit requirements. This program collects stormwater user fees based on the square footage of impervious located on said property. These utility fees are applied uniformly across all entities, including residential properties with single-family through triplex homes receiving a flat fee, schools, nonprofits, for-profits, and commercial, industrial, and agricultural businesses. Each of these properties are eligible to apply for a stormwater credit in accordance with our credit manual, and an example of such a credit was mentioned yesterday with regards to the 50% reduction applied to the Intervale Community Farm. In addition to meeting state and federal water quality requirements, the revenue generated by these stormwater utility fees is used to maintain, repair, replace, and improve our citywide drainage system, which supports the municipality's transportation network, of which our residents, businesses, and emergency services depend on. For context here, Burlington's most recent annual operating budget, including debt servicing, was around $1.3 million for the stormwater program. Regarding S115 as originally introduced, Burlington has concerns with sections 8 and 9, as the language provided therein adversely affects Burlington's ability to meet federal MS4 requirements and state mandated water quality TMDLs. Our two central concerns focus on Legislative Council's legal opinion defining the assessment of a stormwater fee on an agricultural property as regulating that property, and language which lacks the clarity needed to prevent unintended complications. So examples of language which deserve additional discussion include Section 8, the amended bill, dated actually April 24th, removes concerning language, including that of not exceeding the Secretary's authority. However, the new language misrepresents stormwater utility fees by defining them as a fee covering discharges of agricultural waste or agricultural non-point source pollution. In Section 9, the creation of the term stormwater operating fees creates an improper connection between stormwater utilities and the state operational stormwater permit. Stormwater utilities do not charge operating fees as the state does for their operational stormwater permits, which allows the managed discharges of runoff. As discussed above, our stormwater utility fees are not assessed based on discharges from a given site. Rather, they utilize impervious cover on that site as a measurement of that parcel's contribution to the drainage and water quality management needs of the municipality as a whole. Each of these examples provide context as to the existing lack of understanding behind the intent of stormwater utility fees and how they are structured. That is why ensuring this language is clarified is essential to avoid unintentional contradictions and unforeseen consequences. To that end, the Stormwater Program supports the conclusion of the Senate Committee on Finance, which both struck the language in sections 8 and 9 and recommended that the DEC Commissioner create a report on the municipal stormwater regulation of farms. Lastly, I would like to convey Burlington's support of South Burlington's written comments regarding S115 as presented to the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy this past March. Those comments provide additional detail and context to the concerns municipalities have with this proposed legislation. Thanks once again to the committee for allowing my testimony today, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Templeman.
So I listened very carefully, but I'm sorry, I'm a bit limited. Are you agreeing or disagreeing with the finding of the agency's legal staff?
Which finding in particular?
Regarding stormwater not being the responsibility or being handled by the ANR rather than, by the Agency of Agriculture rather than by municipalities, meaning that, the findings that legal counsel of the Ag Agency came to was that the municipalities are not responsible for farm runoff. Are you in agreement with them or not?
Oh,
sorry
to interrupt.
Yeah. Just the last question. Are you in agreement with their findings or not?
So answering your question directly, currently, Legislative Council is stating that assessing a stormwater fee is akin to regulating an agricultural property. At this time, we have concerns with that opinion. We don't have an alternative legal opinion at this moment, but we have concerns regarding that connection. Utility fees are assessed in many ways in a municipality, and none of those are considered regulation. So we do have a concern with that tie.
And your concern is relative to language and clarity of language, if I understand correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And can you cover that a little more detailed and a little slower? Because the subtlety there, I want to understand that.
Absolutely. There's also a distinction between the original bill as introduced and the amendment from April 24th. So I'll speak with regards to the amendment first, if that's okay with you. So sections 8 and 9 have the areas of most concern for us. In section 8, the language has been amended to, and I'm reading from the document right now, municipalities shall not charge a fee under the subdivision or under other provisions of this title for discharges of agricultural waste or agricultural non-point source pollution. So right there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what stormwater utilities are assessing a fee on. We do not consider the discharges from the property. We utilize impervious cover as a metric for that parcel's contribution to our water quality needs as a whole. So that language in section 8 ties our fee to discharges in a way that simply does not exist, nor should it. So that is the first issue we have. In section 9, the language includes something called a stormwater operating fee. In an earlier iteration of this language, the term operating fee was also included in section 8 that has since been struck. But creating the term stormwater operating fee creates an improper connection between a stormwater utility and the state stormwater operating permits. Those are separate. Those regulate discharges. We're not trying to do that in a municipality. So while we could get even into more detail surrounding the lack of clarity in that language, what I really want to convey to the committee is that we're in support of having this conversation. We just really want to give it the time and consideration it needs to not have any potential impacts to how communities are meeting their state and federal water quality requirements.
Representative Templeman, you all set?
Yeah, I got it now. Thank you very much for repeating yourself.
Other questions, committee members? Representative O'Brien.
James, We learned yesterday that the Intervale assessed fees, I guess, for impervious surfaces pay something like 11,000 a year. How much do the UVMs or Champlain colleges or Burlington High School, those sort of, much bigger areas of impervious surface pay? Because we were figuring UVM would be paying, hundreds of thousands potentially at that rate. And I just wondered if you negotiate with those entities or there's really not a lot. I mean, right, you mentioned the credit that you could get it cut in half, but I just wondered if you had any of those numbers.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Representative O'Brien. And I don't have specific totals for you here right now, but I do believe I can partially address your question. The city applies the fees based on something called an impervious surface unit, an ISU. That is based on every 1,000 square feet of impervious cover. So as mentioned above, during my comments, all these entities are uniformly assessed a fee in that for every 1,000 square feet of impervious, they get another ISU, which has a certain billing rate associated with it. So regardless of if you are a commercial entity or school or ag, we only look at the impervious cover and no other aspects of the site. So yes, a parcel that has a really large parking lot, a large building, perhaps crosswalks, sidewalks, etc., that will have a much higher stormwater bill than an agricultural operation, which is likely just getting billed for things like gravel roads.
Representative Rice?
Thanks. I'm a little bit confused about the assertion that this isn't, that you're claiming that this isn't, that assessing a fee isn't regulating farms when the fees are assessed under NIPDES, which is a regulatory program to address discharge.
Municipalities have the authority through the state to create a stormwater utility. That is separate from the requirements under NIPDES. So a municipality in the state of Vermont that does not have an MS4 permit could create a stormwater utility, in which case NIPDES didn't play a role in that decision. So what we have here, I think, two parallel tracks, and I'll do my best to just briefly tease them out, which is through NIPDES, urbanized areas such as Burlington, South Burlington, Colchester, etc. They get assigned something called an MS4 permit. They need to meet certain requirements within that permit. How they do that is up to them. Vermont has allowed municipalities to generate revenue through a stormwater utility. That stormwater utility is not required as part of a NIPDES permit. So NIPDES does not require we assess an impervious cover fee. It is a method available to us. It is a tool in our toolbox to generate revenue to meet state and federal water quality requirements. Does that address your question?
No. I guess the sort of disconnection that I'm feeling is that the reason these towns and cities are doing this is to regulate discharge into stormwater under MS4. Is that, right?
When you say the reason for, is it the reason for the MS4 program or for the stormwater utility to regulate discharge?
Well, both. Yeah, my understanding would be both.
Yeah.
When a municipality becomes an MS4 community, they need to meet 6 minimum control measures. And yes, providing more stringent regulation to sites is part of that requirement. In fact, the MS4 permit specifically requires us to regulate stormwater above and beyond that which the state already mandates. So in that sense, yes, we are very much so interested in making sure that stormwater leaves any site, and as it enters into our drainage network, it does so appropriately. That's the needs of an MS4 permit. The stormwater utility fee is a mechanism in which we can generate these revenues to achieve that end goal. This is a long way of saying that by assessing a fee, we're getting money to meet the state and federal requirements, but not all of those are regulating discharge. For instance, one of them is public education and outreach. We're required by federal law to inform the public and educate them on stormwater. That's a cost that's assigned to us. That's a need we have to meet. There are other things such as, well, I could go down the list for you. But when you say regulating discharge, I believe what you're saying is the RAPs that cover agriculture, very specifically are BMPs that are trying to capture and treat runoff and discharge it in a certain way. Our fee structure is not set up to monitor or regulate these properties in any sense.
Seeing if there's any other hands up. Yes, Representative Graham.
So if, what you're saying, so if the agency of ag was to say, okay, if you're gonna assess these fees and do this work, then the agency would say, we don't need to, and stop all the required practices to contain stormwater. Would that affect your system? If the farmers are allowed to let the stormwater run off into town wastewater pipes?
It is the question if the agency of ag stopped required agricultural practices, would that affect the city?
Yeah.
It wouldn't
As far
affect
as stormwater, just as far as stormwater.
It would not affect our billing structure. Conceivably, the impervious cover on those agricultural sites wouldn't change, so those bills would stay the same. If for some reason those properties, oh, sorry, was there a question?
No.
Burlington does have certain standards regarding the discharge of sediment-laden runoff. If for some reason any property, agricultural or otherwise, was discharging sediment into our right-of-way, that is something we would enforce. But whether or not the agency of ag decides to enforce or regulate or require RAPs, that doesn't affect the municipality's ability to manage their MS4 program. Those are two separate categories of stormwater management.
So there wouldn't be any increased fee from the stormwater utility if the stormwater ran off the farm into the system.
Getting a little nuanced here, if that agricultural property had received a credit through the city of Burlington, because they're in compliance with their RAPs, which is something we offer, right? So if the agricultural operation says, City of Burlington, we're in compliance with our ag-regulated RAPs, they receive a credit. So if they were no longer in compliance, credit wouldn't be applicable anymore. So in that very nuanced situation, that billing could change. But if it's just an agricultural property that's not receiving a credit, nothing changes from a billing standpoint with regards to Burlington.
Representative Rice.
Can you describe that credit program to us?
Sure. So the credit program is intended to provide a stormwater fee reduction if the site can prove they're managing stormwater to certain standards. So for commercial, industrial, for non-ag properties, there's a Vermont State Stormwater Handbook, and there are certain metrics you can hit for management. If a parcel can say, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z in accordance with the handbook, that makes them eligible for certain credits. I know that, for instance, Williston, Vermont also has a educational credit. Like a school can meet basic requirements and receive a credit off their stormwater bill for that. And within the city, we also recognize agriculture. So if agriculture is meeting RAP, they get a credit. The intent is that we want to be mindful of folks managing stormwater on their site and credit them for their efforts in that, credit them for their efforts in the field of water quality.
Representative O'Brien.
To follow up on this credit thing, so the ISUs are inherently connected to the management of stormwater, right? You're saying impervious surfaces are really where it's all beginning, like this discharge. So it seems like if we follow the logic that if you're doing a good job, like the Intervale Farms, that parcel, you get a credit that can reduce your fee by half. So if we follow that logic, if every impervious surface property in Burlington followed essentially RAPs and no stormwater left their property to get into the Burlington municipal stormwater, what would the fees be about?
The maximum credit we currently offer is 50%. So conceivably, if every eligible property were to implement the full extent of BMPs required, best management practices required to meet that 50%, then those properties' bills would go down by half. I should just note here that single family through triplex properties, they receive a flat fee, basically recognizing that small scale residential is somewhat uniform across a municipality. Other municipalities have that same approach with a flat fee for essentially owner-occupied or single-family homes. So those are outside of the crediting process currently, but all other eligible properties could potentially receive up to a 50% credit.
Right. So I'm wondering though, what would the fee be for if every property essentially was responsible for capturing the stormwater and doing it with themselves? So the city of Burlington really would have no stormwater discharge like farms are doing right now.
Two parts to that question. It's not that farms have no stormwater discharges, is that they're meeting their RAPs. RAPs can be met through non-structural and structural measures. So perhaps we can put a pin in that statement right there. But even if all of our eligible properties did the maximum extent they could for stormwater management, there would still be that impervious cover within our watershed. And we would still need to meet our federal and state water quality requirements, in which case the revenue generated would continue to go towards things like managing our drainage network, which facilitates the proper function of our transportation network. One way we think about the stormwater program and the fees generated is the sort of all-in approach of a community. Everyone benefits from properly functioning roads. Everyone benefits from properly functioning drainage networks. And absent federal and state water quality requirements going away, municipalities throughout Vermont still have a significant lift to reduce our contributions of runoff to Lake Champlain or your other receiving water body, be it Connecticut River or otherwise. So the need for stormwater management would not go away, certainly would be reduced. I would love to see a world in which every eligible parcel is doing the maximum what they can, and that would make our job a little bit easier, or it would make our job go away.
So would you ever consider 100% credit then? You know, if a farm was releasing no discharge, so there's no extra burden on the town, could they potentially be waived the entire fee? Or any property like that, right? If UVM was doing it, same thing.
You know, at this time, that is not under consideration from the municipality. There are a few reasons to dive into why that's not necessarily feasible at the moment. One reason in particular is also something that the farm manager from the Intervale Community Farm mentioned yesterday, which was a representative from the committee said, so you're in compliance with your RAPs? And he answered accurately, well, yes, but we're a small enough farm so that they never get inspected by the state. So you can be in compliance with your RAPs, but not actually receive any inspection or direct oversight from the Agency of Ag, in which case you still might be discharging stormwater to a drainage network. you're certainly still discharging runoff to a receiving water body, but you're just doing it in a controlled and allowable manner. So stormwater is not going away unless you have tremendous infiltration rates. You can't possibly keep runoff from leaving your site. It's just how well you can manage it before it leaves your site.
James, questions, a couple of numbers related questions. If you have the information at your fingertips, how many farms are within the Burlington city limits, or how many properties that are farms? And then wondering if you have a sense of the dollar amount that the farms are contributing to the fees, and then compare that to the total that you're collecting annually.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Queen City is relatively unique in this instance in that we have very few farms, the majority of which are located at the Intervale. I believe as of last check, we have around 9 properties that are classified as ag. That doesn't equate to how many farms there are. As the farm manager yesterday mentioned, they lease the land, and there are a number of separate farm operations on the Intervale. So not answering your question on the number of farms or farmers, but purely the parcels, I want to say it's around 9 as of last check. Some of those receive a stormwater bill of $0 because they have no impervious cover. In other words, they're classified as ag land, but there's no active operation. So we really have, I believe, 5 or under 5 properties that receive a stormwater bill that are ag. If Burlington were to completely stop receiving fees from ag, that wouldn't affect our budget too much. That changes when you go to Colchester or Williston or the other communities that have these sorts of programs, or a future community that wants to take advantage of the tool in their toolbox to create a stormwater utility. To be quite clear, the Burlington Stormwater Program isn't necessarily saying no uniform credit should be applied. As a matter of fact, when VTrans originally requested a full exemption, through negotiations, it was decided that VTrans gets a uniform 35% credit on all stormwater fees throughout the state. Having that discussion with regards to ag is completely reasonable, and we want to have it. Our central concern is that some of the language associated with how these exemptions take place have unintended consequences in how MS4s can continue to meet MS4 and MS4 being federal and state water quality requirements. So kind of to our core point here, the Senate committee that passed the amended bill that suggests a more detailed report be completed by DEC, we're in support of that because it'll give us more time to have this back and forth and land on the proper language to provide whatever credit or possible exemption the state deems necessary. Just at this time, some of the language is uncertain enough to be quite concerning.
We've heard anecdotally, at least, that some farms, and I'm not sure whether it's the case in Burlington, but some farms in the state have, after inquiring of the Agency of Agriculture, being told that that the Agency of Agriculture, in the Agency of Agriculture's opinion, the municipality doesn't have the authority to be collecting this fee. We've heard that some farms have not paid the fee. And I'm just wondering if that's the case in Burlington.
So far, all agricultural properties that are being billed are in compliance. In other words, they're paying in full. I don't have any knowledge otherwise in Burlington.
Thank you. Committee members, any other questions? Go ahead, Representative O'Brien.
Oddball question. Do you assess Burlington International Airport? Because it's one of those weird things, right? They're in maybe partly South Burlington, but.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So within the world of MS4, I've been saying MS4 a lot. Folks don't know what that means. It's municipally separate storm sewer system. It's the federal designation. There are traditional MS4s, which are a town And then there are non-traditional MS4s, sometimes referred to as small MS4s. UVM campus and the airport are both their own MS4s. So they fall into a unique category of impervious cover, and they are also regulated very stringently through the NIPD's permit, which was mentioned earlier. Yes, it is a Burlington entity, but it's outside of our city limits. The city doesn't assign a stormwater fee to the airport.
But they might pay one under the mini MS4.
So South Burlington has a stormwater utility. I actually cannot comment on if they're assigning a fee to the airport. I would encourage you to reach out to Dave Wheeler, whose comments I actually mentioned in my verbal testimony, or Tom DePietro at South Burlington to answer that question. But because they are a small MS4 in and of themselves, they need to meet standards on their own accord. So I'm not sure if I entirely answered your question, but they're held to a very strict standard, just like the municipalities.
James, you mentioned earlier, and we'd heard other testimony to the same effect, I think, that AOT had negotiated credit with Burlington. Can you talk a little bit about the underlying rationale why their properties would be eligible or might be considered for a credit?
To clarify one aspect, VTrans did not negotiate a credit with Burlington. VTrans received a 35% credit statewide for any and all stormwater utilities which they may fall within. That wasn't a municipal specific decision. I was actually working as the Burlington Stormwater Coordinator. I was actually working as the Williston Stormwater Coordinator at the time when that happened. And essentially VTrans said, hey, we don't think we should pay. Negotiations happened with the state, and that credit of 35% was eventually landed upon. I can't give you more context at the moment as to their specific rationale as to why they were exempt. I can say that the Agency of Transportation and VTrans is itself a unique regulated entity when it comes to stormwater here in the state.
Thank you for that clarification. And then back to the credit that the farm manager mentioned yesterday that I think you also confirmed 50% credit, at least currently, for that property. Are all farms in Burlington also given that same 50% credit?
Don't actually have that answer for you at the moment. Any farm that has documented they're meeting their RAPs would be eligible for that credit. As mentioned, the Intervale went through that effort. And it's my understanding Intervale has the only active agricultural operations in the city. That is an answer I can get to the committee.
Yeah, thanks. That would be helpful. And then Representative O'Brien's got another question.
James, how does it work with the Burlington Stormwater Utility essentially assessing Burlington city-owned properties for impervious surfaces? Is it a line item that's essentially not paid, or?
That's a really good question, and differing municipalities approach this in different ways. For instance, Burlington does not charge a fee for its roadways. However, properties like schools, which have large buildings and parking lots, they do pay a stormwater fee. The town of Williston, the town itself, the general fund, pays a fee for its roads contributions to the stormwater fund, which is an enterprise fund. That's the same thing in Burlington. So it varies by municipality, but in Burlington, again, the roads are currently exempted. The general fund does not pay for their contribution of roads to the stormwater fund. Other aspects of the city municipality do.
Like Burlington City Public Works, wherever your town garages are and parking lots for that.
Yes, that's the case. The parcels in the municipality that are non right of way very likely receive a stormwater bill.
Can Burlington apply for the credit then?
That's a good question. We haven't gone down that road. Burlington itself has a number of disparate departments that have their own stormwater treatment systems. And yes, they're absolutely eligible for credit reductions. The city departments that have parcels with stormwater treatment systems on them can receive a credit.
Thank you.
Representative Rice.
I'm just wondering if you can talk us through the logic of the Burlington's roads being entirely exempt. I know in the written comments from South Burlington, they specifically say no property should be entirely exempt from stormwater utility fees. So sort of why does Burlington feel like the roads shouldn't be assessed these fees from the general fund?
That's another good question. It was a decision made back in 2009. This program was originally created. I do not know the argument to exempt roads. I can say that other municipalities have those roads as part of the billing. I can try to dig through the memories of some folks that were here in 2009 and get an answer for you. You could make a very strong argument that they should, in fact, they being the general fund, should in fact contribute to the stormwater fund. It's a nuanced conversation, but at the current moment, that's not how our stormwater utility is set up.
I'm not seeing any other hands up here. James, I'll just say this has been extremely helpful to sort of hear your perspective, but also just to get a sense of how it's around. That reminds me that another question I had, and I asked it earlier this morning, and it's really to clarify, the farmer who was here indicated that the property that he managed was, and for lack of a better term, and I'm sure there is a better term, not upstream of the system, so that if in fact there was any discharge of stormwater, it wouldn't end up in the stormwater utilities' actual drains. And so I guess you can confirm that if you happen to know, but also confirm that you're assessing the fee to any property that has impervious surface in the city limits, regardless of where they're located, elevation wise or altitude wise.
You are the latter half of your statement is correct. Regardless of if or how discharges occur, discharges being runoff leaving one parcel and entering another or into our right of way, we bill versus impervious cover. That's one of the concerns I had with some of the existing language in the amended Section 8. It conflates the assessment of a stormwater fee based on impervious cover with assessment of a discharge. So that is correct. Even if they have limited discharges or no discharges, the bill is based on the impervious cover. From a water quality standpoint, this actually makes a lot of sense. There have been many studies that show when a watershed begins to have more than 10% of impervious cover within its boundaries, it starts to degrade the receiving water body. And we all know that Lake Champlain has a phosphorus TMDL, but other receiving water bodies in the city of Burlington are similarly regulated by the state, including some of our brooks for stormwater TMDLs. So in the all-in approach of all impervious is overall adding to the degradation of our water bodies and our state and federal regulations. That all comes with a price tag. And that's why we have this all-in billing approach throughout the city, regardless of how or if discharges take place from a particular property.
Thank you for that. I think we'll let you go then. I'll just say again, though, if you can send us your comments, that would be helpful. We've been looking at this, these sections of the bill initially from a legal standpoint and trying to get clarification on whether in fact municipalities had the authority that that you and others have been asserting you do have. And I understand you said earlier that you don't have an alternative legal opinion, although you concur with the sense that you do have that authority. So what I think what you discussed earlier will be helpful for the committee in bringing that back to our legislative council and seeing what the reaction is. And to the extent that you have anything you can add to that you want to include in your written comments, please feel free to do that. And yeah, and again, thank you for joining us this morning.
And I thank you for having me here with the opportunity to testify. We really do appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
So we have a little more time this morning if there's any sort of immediate reactions or responses. We've got the floor at 1 o'clock that should run not terribly long, I think, today, and we'll plan to come back. We will hear if Mike is available. I think he is at 2:30 at least, from him on the statute regarding conservation districts. But if we're done earlier, we can also return to this topic after the floor. Cool. If you want to think about it, mull it over a little bit. Great. Okay.
Sounds good.